Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Alex Shuker, CTO at DrayTek UK. Today I'm joined by Amy Hood, Product Specialist, and we're going to give you a presentation on the 10 gig managed switches, introducing those to the DrayTek range of switch products that we have. So just like to cover the agenda today, we can start with a brief overview of the solution sets, just to recap on the DrayTek kind of product range briefly. That'll just be kind of 5 minutes, and then we'll go into an overview of the range of DrayTek switches, including the 10 gig switch, and then we will look at the cloud managed aspect of the switching to see how you can manage those using our Vigor ACS central management system. And then at the end we'll have a Q&A session where you'll be able to ask any questions that you might have about the switch. So in the solution sets, I'd just like to talk about just our routers, access point switches, and Vigor ACS just briefly. The products that we're most known for are the router product range. This is what DrayTek are most known for. Our flagship is the 2862 series of ADSL, DSL, VDSL routers. The one here I've got on the left hand side is the 2862 LAC, so that also has wireless 8211 AC wireless and also LT for mobile broadband. That's our kind of flagship top of the range products, but we've got other variants on there. We also have other models in the range, and the DrayTek products are really good for business continuity, and we get good feedback from customers that they're easy to use, good for business and reliable, and kind of have all the features you might need in an affordable price. And our mission is to provide products and solutions to help businesses exploit the full potential of the internet. The internet can be unreliable, kind of unsecure and difficult to control, so we try and provide solutions to mitigate these issues and any issues that can occur, and to provide a good reliable internet connection that allows businesses to get on with whatever they're specializing in. For the business continuity, you've got the multi-WAN, so we've got products that do ADSL, VDSL, Ethernet WAN, 4G mobile broadband, and also wireless WAN, where you can connect the wireless of one of our products to another wireless network to piggyback off that, which is quite useful as well. And we've got a SIM slot in some of the range, ones which have the L range of products. So they have a slot where you can put in a SIM into the back of the unit. And we also have a range of firewalls as well. So these are all Ethernet-based RJ45 presentation. So there's a kind of a range of those. The key feature is that they're high throughput, multi-WAN up to 4 WAN ports. In fact, some of them do virtual WANs as well, so you can have more than 4 potentially. And we've got VPN concentrations where you can have up to 500 megabits per second when it comes to, up to 500 VPN tunnels. And we've got high throughput products. And then the other part of the solution set is our access points, including our new mesh access points, for example, the Vigor AP 903. And there's a comprehensive range of access points for different installation types, so including external. And the range provides kind of reliable and affordable access points that you can use to implement wireless across multiple sites, large sites, small sites. And we've got a wireless app that allows you to more easily configure the devices, and there's different kind of wall mounting methods as well. So that's a nice part of the range. And finally, coming on to the main event of today, which is our switches. We've got a large range, increasing in the number of different products we've got, ranging from kind of the 8-port to 50-port switches. We've got different sizes. Some are ones you might put a rack in a rack, and others are on that you might just put on a table. And we've now got the switches with 10 gigabit Ethernet ports via SFP+, and we have PoE and non-PoE managed unmanaged switches. On the new models in the range, they've got a bunch of features. So high speed 10 gigabit SFP+ for uplinks between devices, advanced layer 2 featuring, layer 2 plus routing features. So that means you can do things like static routes and VLANs in the switch as well. So that means it can take care of some of the routing functionality, and ample PoE budget of 100 watts, and it can be managed centrally or standalone. So the devices can be managed centrally via Vigor ACS, or they can be managed by a router, or on their own. If you don't have a DrayTek router, you can just use the switch and manage its routes web interface. They are fully capable to be able to have all the intelligence inside of them as well, so they can be run without a controller if you want to as well. We've got a range of great security features and things like voice surveillance, VLAN as well, to help prioritize and separate automatically your IP cameras and IP phones. And there's some things like hardware monitoring, some of the models to help with keeping monitoring of the switch and energy efficient PoE. Amy's going to go into more details on that when she looks through the introduction of the P and G2280X. And finally, the thing that brings it all together is the management. We've got single site management with the router. So this is free included in the routers. Depends on which model in which device they support. So do check that on any individual DrayTek router model and look to see in the comparison chart to see which of our switches and access points are supported by that model. But there's a range of switches and access points that can be managed directly from the router through its central management feature, which means you can go onto the router and configure and deploy settings to the access points and to the switches and look at the status and actually see some of the topology, which is really good for a complete networking solution set for a small to medium-sized office, all from the router. But then going larger, when you're looking at multi-sites or larger installations, we've got Vigor ACS Central Management, which allows you to manage all of your switches and access points and routers from one central place with Vigor ACS from a control panel, where you can look at your switches, all the devices connected to switches, look at the routers and get alerts if anything goes wrong with any of the WAN connections or VPNs, and do some essential configuration things like central configuration changes, provisioning devices that are being shipped to site, and then automatically getting them on board and configured, firmware updates, inventory management, and doing config backups and reporting on the estate, especially things like understanding how much bandwidth is being used from each site. And if you want to find out what a specific setting is, you can run reports to look at that on different devices and across the network. And now going on, let's have a look at the managed switches. So I'm going to now pass along to Amy so that she can run through the switch management. And I'll just pause for a moment and then we'll move to presenting.
Hello everyone, I'm Amy Hood, a DrayTek product specialist, and today I'll be introducing the new 10 gigabit switch range. Currently that's 2 products, and to do that I'll be going through this agenda here. So initially I'll explain how the naming works for our DrayTek switches, then introducing the 2 new switches and their management facilities. And after that, I'll be going through the major features of these switches, so things like 10 gigabit and VLAN routing as the most interesting features. Now, you can check the switch range for yourself on the DrayTek UK website. You go to Products, Switches, and then Network Switches. And on there, we can see a table of switches currently available. Notice we have ports, switches from 8 to 50 ports. And the 2 new switches are the only 2 at the moment with 10 gigabit SFP plus capability. So to go through the naming schema that's used, I've replaced the letters with A and B. Notice in the top right it says VSP2280X-K, DrayTek UK product code. Now initially we've got VS, stands for VigorSwitch. The G or P indicates whether it's a regular gigabit switch or whether it's got PoE capability. The 1 or 2 indicates whether it's a standard or more advanced switch. And in this case, because this one is a 2 model, it's more advanced. It has features like Gate221X, console serial connectivity. The number of ports, 1 to 99, in this case 28, the version. And lastly, the suffix. So the suffix in this case is an X, so it indicates that it's got 10 gigabit capability. So any other switches that have an X, they should be 10 gigabit capable as well. Now to line all that up, we've got a PoE advanced switch with 28 ports and 10 gigabit capability. Now to introduce the P2280X and G2280X VigorSwitches, I'll begin by showing a picture of it. So here we have the VigorSwitch P2280X, and as you can see, it's got 24 gigabit LAN ports on it. Because this is a PoE model, they're PoE Plus capable, up to 30 watts per port. You have 4 dedicated SFP Plus ports, each has 10 gigabits bandwidth available. Or they are also backwards compatible with standard SFP 1 gigabit if you have other devices that don't support 10 gig. There's a total of 400 watts of PoE budget, so you have a quite high power budget for a switch of this number of ports. And there's also a new feature to these switches is VLAN routing, which is kind of a layer 3 feature, hence we call it a layer 2 plus switch. Now you'll notice on the side that there are 2 fans. So this switch is fan cooled, although they are smart fans, so they don't always run at full speed. The G model, not pictured, doesn't have fans on the side, it's passively cooled. It's a bit smaller as well. So to go through the management features available on VigorSwitches, they can be managed locally, so they don't have to be used with a management solution, they can be used directly. They can be managed through a DrayTek Vigor router as a simple way of provisioning switches and monitoring them for a single site. Lastly, there's Vigor ACS, which is a central management solution to manage switches from anywhere. And Alex will go through that in more detail later on. Now, the local management, so as you can see, there's the dashboard here. So that shows a virtual port status, so you can see which ports have PoE, what speeds they're going at, and whether there's any errors detected, PoE usage. Now this is web-based, but there's also a command line interface which you can access through the serial port on the front, the console port, or you can access the switch via SSH to configure it. Now, the router switch management, so the router has to support the switch in firmware to be able to manage it, and it's supported with the 391 firmware, which is already available for all the DrayTek router models. So with that, you can overview the status of switches and provision them, so put the VLAN settings or rate limiting or scheduling on them, and you can perform maintenance, so backing up configurations and restoring configurations. So one nice thing with the router switch management is it gives you a virtual topology of your network. So any switches plugged into the router, what VigorSwitches, it's able to show how they're linked to each other and which ports are in use. And you're able to click on individual ports to see which IP addresses they have, which MAC addresses, and you're able to, on PoE models, you're able to enable or disable the port, turn PoE on and off. You're also able to provision the VLANs to these switches, as well as provision rate limits and things like that. So with that, notice you've got 3 LANs shown here. Those are the LANs set up on the router itself with the VLAN tags automatically populated. And to configure the switch, you just select which tick boxes, which VLANs apply to each of the ports on the switch. And then you send it to the switch, and the router then programs it with all the VLAN configuration. So this is a dashboard of a DrayTek VigorSwitch in Vigor ACS. So this can be managed from sites, for remote sites. It doesn't even need a DrayTek router on the site to manage it. And so the switch connects into a Vigor ACS system and waits for management or sends status information. In this instance, we can see the same port status you see if you connect locally. And you also have usage graphs and alerts. As you can see down on the left, there's some CPU usage, PoE usage, and you can see things like the firmware version as well. Now, the switch management is designed, well, with Vigor ACS, is designed to have the same look and feel as it does when managing locally. So, for instance, you're able to see the individual PoE usage of PoE ports through Vigor ACS, and you're able to perform the same actions that you can locally. Alex will be going through this in a bit more detail later on. And now I'll be moving on to the key features of these new switches. So to begin with, the major feature is the 10 gigabit capability. And why would you want 10 gigabit on a switch? The main answer is more bandwidth. You've got more speed to work with. So just to give an example, if you're connecting two switches using a gigabit link, so you've got a single gigabit link connecting them, and you've got a bunch of devices using that bandwidth, they're each fighting over that gigabit bandwidth, which leads to significant bottlenecks on a busy enough network. So with 10 gigabit, you can very easily cater for the full bandwidth of all of the ports on the switch. You can also connect in servers and network attached storage and make full use of their bandwidth if they're 10 gigabit capable as well. Now, if you have DrayTek switches that don't have 10 gigabit capability, you can achieve similar using a feature called link aggregation, which effectively teams up the ports so that you can use 2, 4, 6, or 8 ports to increase bandwidth to 2, 4, 6, or 8 gigabits. But of course, this uses a number of ports on the switch. Now, SFP Plus can also use port trunking, but you're able to do that with a much higher bandwidth. Okay, so moving on, the SFP Plus capability of the switches. So 10 gigabit Ethernet can have two forms of presentation. You've got RJ45, which is used by some other devices, and DrayTek use SFP Plus, which, as you can see the modules here, this is a DrayTek DAC CX10 module, which is able to connect switches or other 10 gigabit capable SFP Plus devices at either 1 gig or 10 gigabits, depending on the capability of the device. So with that, the CX10 cable is available in 1 and 10 meter variations. Sorry, I retract that. 1 and 3 meter variations. Now, onto the next interesting feature of these switches. The P22ATX has some layer 3 features, which makes it a layer 2 plus switch, in effect. So what this means is it's able to do IP level routing between VLANs. So IP level is layer 3, and it does this using VLAN routing and static routes. So in this example, we've got a marketing department, an R&D department, and some servers, each of which are on different IP ranges. Now, typically you could have that go through a router, but this means that you're potentially limited by the router's firewall throughput. With the P22ATX, the transfer speeds between subnets go through at what we call wire speed, which is where it goes at the full rate of the Ethernet link, whether that's 1 gig or 10 gigabits. So this can be a bit quicker potentially. Now, you still have full control over the access between the different subnets. The switch has an access control list, which is effectively the switch's firewall. Now, how you set that up is the switch creates an IP address on each of the different subnets, and the network uses that IP as its gateway. So if you're using a different router on the network, you could have static routes on that router forwarding traffic for the 3 subnet through this 2.200 address. Alternatively, you can have the switch be used as the main gateway for the network, and the static routes allow you to set the router's IP as the gateway for internet and VPN traffic. So the PoE switch model has a number of advanced features. I'll just go through some of those. And to start with, there's device check. Now that is a feature to ensure that the ports connected to, or devices connected to the switch, are functioning correctly. And to do that, the switch sends pings every now and then to IP addresses that you specify, so maybe an IP camera's IP address or an access point or devices behind it. And if that stops responding, the switch can restart the port in an attempt to regain connectivity, or it can send an email notification. You've also got scheduling, which allows you to set when your ports are active. So for instance, if you want your access points to only provide wireless access during office hours, you can do that by turning off the PoE outside of office hours. Now, PoE priority ties into a feature called hardware monitor, which I'll go into more detail in a bit. So PoE priority allows you to set the importance of devices connected to each port. So say, for instance, on some ports, you've got some IP cameras connected, and having those working is essential. But you've got some other less important devices, like maybe some voice over IP phones. So if the switch has any kind of problem, say if it goes over its PoE power budget, then it can turn off the less important devices to make sure that only the important ones, or so as many of the important ones as possible, will stay working. Now, the switches also have a good number of quality of service and bandwidth control features. So quality of service you can set up manually so that, say for instance, voice over IP traffic can be prioritized over bulk data. So that, for instance, if you're doing a large file transfer and you've used the full bandwidth of the link, that wouldn't interrupt voice over IP calls because the switch would prioritize the VoIP packets over the data packets. You've also got, with bandwidth control, you can do port rate limiting to set speed limits for individual ports. So if you want to limit a switch port to 5 megabits up and 10 megabits down, you can do that using this switch. There are also some helpful features to assist with configuring all of this. So these switches have things called voice VLAN and surveillance VLAN. Now, how that works is the voice VLAN, for instance, recognizes the manufacturer's MAC address identifier for a number of IP phones, or you can specify them manually. And when it recognizes a phone connected in, it can put that into the correct specified VLAN. So you've got a VLAN specific to phones, and it can automatically prioritize the phone's traffic over regular bulk data. Surveillance VLAN is the same thing, although it's more specific to IP cameras. So as another benefit to setting up IP cameras with these switches, you've got ONVIF IP camera management. So ONVIF is the Open Network Video Interface Forum standard. That's an open standard for configuring IP cameras and NVR systems. Similar to TR-069 for routers, you've got ONVIF for IP cameras. So once that's set up, the switch can auto-detect which ports have IP cameras and NVRs connected, and it's able to give you a visual indication of if there's any port faults, and it's able to do a bit more with that as well. So you're able to set, say for instance, your NVR port. If that goes over its throughput limit, then the switch can send out a notification. Sorry. Okay, so just to recap, sorry, I had the microphone off. So ONVIF is a standard for controlling IP cameras and NVR systems through an open standard similar to TR-069. So when that's configured on the switch, it's able to auto-detect IP cameras and NVRs connected to the switch, which ports they're connected to, and give you an overview of the network status, so you can see if the cameras are working, etc. And it's also able to set up notifications. Say, for instance, if your NVR, if its LAN port goes over its bandwidth threshold, that could mean that it's potentially losing video data. So the switch can send out a notification if it goes over the set throughput. Now, OnVIF also allows you to have an overview of the video feed of the cameras. So you can see here it's detected 2 cameras, and you're able to switch between the video feed of the 2. And that could have a number of other cameras. So I don't have a picture of this, but the device maintenance feature allows you to configure the IP addressing and other OnVIF features of OnVIF standard supporting cameras. So if you connect a group of cameras into the switch, it's a very quick way potentially to set up a number of cameras just directly through the switch. Now, moving on to the hardware monitoring facility. So I mentioned earlier this allows it to work alongside the Power over Ethernet. So the hardware monitoring allows the switch to be aware of its temperature. So if it gets too hot or too cold, it can send a notification. But it's also that ties into the Power over Ethernet, so that if the switch gets too hot and is unable to function correctly in that environment, the switch can reduce its PoE power budget so that it continues powering essential devices and keeps working, but it will be able to turn off less important devices to make sure that the important devices stay working in the event of maybe a room that's too hot or something. It can also set alarms so that if it does get too hot or too cold, it can send mail notifications for that. And the temperature sensor also allows it to tie into the fans. So the fans don't always run at full speed. In an open environment where it's cool and there's a low PoE usage, it can run the fans at a low speed so it's nice and quiet. If it's in a hot environment and using its full budget, it can run the fans at full speed. But they only run as fast as they need to. Now, these switches also have a number of advanced network security and management features, and just to go over a few of those. So the main one from my perspective is the AAA capability. So that is radius and TACAX, or TACAX plus authentication. So that's 802.1x, and this switch also supports web authentication. Authorization to control access of the authenticated clients or which VLAN they go into, or if they don't authenticate, then they can be put into a guest VLAN. And new to this switch model, there's the accounting facility, which allows the switch to send usage data, or sorry, send usage information for authenticated clients to a radius accounting server. So these DrayTek switches are also fully IPv6 ready with IPv6 support. They also have IPv4 multicast snooping, so that's IGMP, which is IPv4 multicast snooping and querying capability. And they've got MLD, so that's IPv6 multicast snooping and querying. So you're able to control multicast traffic so that it only goes to the ports it needs to on the network. There's also DHCP snooping, which allows the switch to control which DHCP servers are allowed on the network. Say if only port 1 is supposed to be sending DHCP responses, if something is plugged into a different port that's giving DHCP responses, it won't cause problems on the network because the switch will just drop those unwanted DHCP packets. As I mentioned earlier, there's the access control list. So this allows you to control which IP addresses, services, and packet types, or which ports are able to contact which through the switch, giving you full control, similar to a firewall, of what goes through or between the ports on the switch. And lastly, there's IP conflict prevention. So this is a feature new to DrayTek switches, which allows you to, or allows the switch to collect information on the network so that it's able to catalog the IP addresses, important IP addresses on the network. And with that, you can fix the design of your network so that your DHCP servers, which ports, IP addresses, MAC addresses, and which ports can have switches connected are all specified fixed on the switch. So that if something changes, the switch is able to intelligently react to that. So notice here it's got an overview of the switch ports, and it will give a warning if there's a conflict. It's also able to shut down the conflicting ports. So if something else tries to claim the 1.1 address, like the router address, then the switch is able to ignore that and stop it from negatively affecting the network. And that allows you to very quickly detect problems and gives you a topology of the network. Now onto the cloud switch management. So Alex will be going through this, just explaining how you can manage switches and other DrayTek products through Vigor ACS.
Thank you, Amy. So she's given you a bit of an overview there now on the features that are all packed into the switches. I'd now like to give a bit of a run through of the cloud management, so you can see how the switches can be managed from Vigor ACS in addition to all the management you can do locally. Anything that Amy's shown there when it comes to the router interface, I mean the switch interfaces, can all be done on the switches, so none of that requires the cloud management to be able to use those features. Those features are all in the boxes regardless of whether or not you use the cloud management. But I just wanted to give an overview now of cloud management so you can see what sort of capabilities and how you can more easily manage a range of switches on multiple different sites, all from one place. First, I want to give a little bit of a run through of how Vigor ACS works when it comes to how things communicate with each other. What we do is we have a range of your products all on the internet somewhere, switches, access points, and routers, and they all communicate using a protocol called TR69 to the Vigor ACS server. The Vigor ACS server could be hosted in the cloud by us or by some other partner, or it could be something that's on site where you're self-hosting it. Maybe you've got it in your own data center or on the premise, the self-hosted version. And the communication using TR69 is across HTTPS, so it's encrypted communication to the ACS server, so that keeps that secure. And the devices will phone home every roughly 15 minutes, but they can also be queried by the ACS server at any point. So if you want to make a change on a device, you instruct the ACS server to do that, and then it will then poke the device that you want to change, and it then does an out of sequence update, and then will automatically update it. So you don't have to wait 15 minutes for any settings to be changed. They tend to be changed immediately. But for the regular sending of traffic, it happens once every 15 minutes roughly, so that helps with keeping the overall bandwidth usage down with the reporting. And you can log into the ACS server using any compatible HTML compatible browser. It doesn't need any add-ons or anything. It's just HTML5, so that means it can go across any different ecosystem. Providing it's a web browser that supports HTML5, you can use that on your device to get the control panel. And here's a screenshot of it, but if I move to the next slide, it'll give you an overview of what the dashboard looks like when you log in. When you first log in, you're able to see any of the networks you've got permissions to see. Different users can have different permissions in what networks you can give them, depending on which account you have, whether it's self-hosted or hosted. There's different options on the granularity you have with how you can separate the networks. But broadly speaking, any user, when they log in, they'll have access to a specific network or networks, and you can see those on the left-hand side with the root network there. And if you then look at the network overview, you can see all the different networks, how many devices there are, and a snapshot of how many clients, the general traffic, and also there's Google Maps integration, so you can see where different devices are, and you can get a picture of all the devices around the network. If you select a network, let's say, for example, we've gone into company B and selected site 2 on the left-hand side there, we can then see the number of devices in that, and you can see here we've got a router, a couple of switches, a couple of APs on this page. We can go to the second page if we want to see the other devices. And then if we go into an individual device here, we've gone onto the 2862 with our routers on ACS. Any devices that are on the network of a router then appear as devices underneath it, so they appear as under in the hierarchy below the router, so that they're categorized to make it easier for you to see which devices are on a different on connected to a different router. But you can separate it as well differently. You can organize by different networks. You can use the networks however you want. You could have a network per site, or you can have one site, multiple networks at a site. You could have a network of all your APs and a network of all your switches all on one site, and you can nest it with child networks if you want to. So we can see here with the 2862, it's got the information of the site name, details of its MAC address, firmware version, DSL information, and system resources, all the sort of things that would be useful for you to, at a glance, find out about. And for the routers, we can also look at the router switch management. So if we go onto that device and go to the switch menu, the router switch management is also supported in ACS. So this is not the devices, the switches being managed by ACS. This is the switches being managed by the router, and the router providing ACS with information of its on-site switch management. So here we can see the same sort of thing you would see if you were logged into the router directly, where you have the switch status with the details of your switches, MAC addresses, models, uptime, number of ports in use, that sort of thing. And you can do the sort of functions you might do on the router. For example, if you want to search and add a device, you can do that on there. And also we have the switch hierarchy on the right hand side. If you click on that there, then you then get a topology view where you can see the ports of the router. So here we have port 1, 2, 3, 4 of the router, and on port 4 we've got a VigorSwitch connected, and this shows you the details of that switch and what ports are active. So you can see those green means that there's a device connected to that, and these icons here mean uplink and downlink. So an arrow going down means it's connected to another switch, an arrow going up means it's connected to the router. So here we can see that arrow going down is going to this switch on port 24. We have another switch, and we can see that's the uplink port there that is connected to that switch, and you can then get a nice hierarchy view of the switches on your network. If you go to an individual switch on Vigor ACS, you can get the dashboard directly as well. So here we've changed from, instead of it being the router, now we're going to the dashboard of an individual switch that's on our network, and we go to the dashboard and we can see the front panel of the switch, and it shows us the real status. So here we can see at the top we've got some in green and some ports in orange. Green means it's 100 meg, gigabit, and orange means it's 100 meg. And we can see there's some little lightning icons that represents PoE. So we can see those first three ports 1, 2, and 4 are PoE enabled, and we can see the port status on the right hand side there as well, with the different Gigabit Ethernet ports listed there, status, link status, and everything on there. We can go drill into more information. Here we go to the configuration and port settings. We can then look at all the different ports, and we can, at a click, if we want to, go into the select tool, for example, and select all the ports and make changes to the status, enable, disable them, set the speeds. If we go into an individual port, hit port 1, we can enable it, set the speed, duplex, flow control, that sort of thing. And we can also give it a description. Here we're adding a description of the device that we know we've got connected to that port, which can help us with maybe remotely troubleshooting a switch if we're going to a later day, or maybe 5, 6, 7 months down the line. It acts as an aid to memory. And then after we do that, we can then, if we go back to the panel, you can see the descriptions written in there for the devices that we've added in, which can be quite handy. And we can see the status there. So there's also a way of looking at the power consumption. So if we go into the properties of the switch here, we can see the overall power budget of how much it's got capable on it, and what it can it's currently consuming, and how much remaining power. This the P1280 has a total budget of 340, so the budget will depend on the exact model. So the P2280X has a higher budget, so it would list a higher power budget on there. And you can go into different things. You can schedule enabling and disabling ports, but also you can go into an individual port and power cycle it. So here, if we look on the right hand side, you've got the port cycle option. That allows you to power cycle those ports. Sometimes maybe an IP camera is not responding. It's not clear why that might be. One thing you can try is just go and recycle a PoE just to give it a reboot without having to go physically to the switch and unplug the port, or to having to go to the wherever the device is in the building to power cycle it there. So you can do it just remotely, which is quite handy. And you can do firmware upgrades as well on the devices. So in the same way that you can update your access points and your routers, you can update switches through the interface of Vigor ACS, where you can do a firmware update. And you can schedule that as well. So if you wanted to do it out of hours, you can schedule it to be done at a specific time. And you can roll it out across the estate as well, where you can pick devices and models. So that's quite handy for managing a large number of different switches at different premises. So that gives a general overview. So it's just to recap, really easy to use with a nice interface, and we got support for Vigor ACS, so you can get assistance from us with using Vigor ACS if you have any questions, and it's got all the capability of the routers, switches, and access points built into ACS as well. So in principle, any setting that you set on the router, you should, or access points or switches, you should be able to do in Vigor ACS. There's some variation on that to very new features that are added in firmware have to also be added into Vigor ACS as well to match the settings, because any individual parameter on a device then has to be known about by Vigor ACS for it to be configured through the interfaces and the user interface. You can of course manually set an individual thing through the advanced menu, where you're actually just sending TR69 parameters across, and that's also a way that you can do using XML to provision things as well by uploading files into ACS. That's more provisioning if you're happening to want to send units to site that then only get configured once you turn them on and report back home to ACS, which is really good for reducing costs. But it's kind of highly flexible, highly configurable, and very easy to use. There's two different methods of hosting it, either self-hosted, where you're running the server yourself, or hosted by us on the cloud. To go over those options, it's license per node. Any access point, router, or switch, it counts as one node, and when you come to using ACS, it's about how many nodes you want in total, and that's how many you get a license for, and it's an annual license. And then you can, if you've got self-hosted, you can get say 100 nodes, and then if you want to add on to it, you can add it mid-term. You can add additional nodes onto your network. And we have the self-hosted, where DrayTek will take care of the running of the server, and you just get given an account that you can then use to log into and manage it, and just set up the accounts. So that's a slightly easier way of getting started, because you don't have to worry about the kind of installation. But that is a general, that's everything we got for today when it comes to the content. So thank you very much everyone for attending today.